What is the best "you have no power here" moment you have ever seen? Story 1. I used to work for a super mean manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, talking crap about us to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. The new manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old douchebag comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is crappier than ever, and how much this store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, "If you don't leave, then the cops are gonna make you." When the idiot didn't move, the new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The douchebag is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. You know he's a douchebag because he came back to where he got fired from. Yep, absolutely right. Not only that, it just confirms that he has issues in his life that he has to deal with. He needs a psychologist and medication, so he probably nitpicks and craps on everybody and everything around him, when in fact he is the problem. It sounds like your old manager needed to eat a Happy Meal and chill the heck out. Too bad for him, he'll have to drive to the next town over to get one. Story 2. I was waiting for a friend to finish work. She worked at a restaurant so fancy, they had someone vetting guests at a podium outside. The place was glitzy, and the folks were glam, so the great and good would descend in droves. Those with a reservation were sent in. Prospective walk-ins had to queue. A car sweeps up, the driver jumps out and holds the door open to unleash a hat and a dress. The woman accompanying said finery, a C-list actress from a regional daytime TV show, looked through everyone present and moved to enter. She froze appalled when the guest vetter intercepted, asking, "Do you have a reservation?" She must have not heard the question because she didn't respond. Instead, she drew herself up to full height of her couture and demanded, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," said the maitre d', back of the queue. Oof. LOL. I did the same when I was bouncing. I was out policing the queue when a group came over to me and asked if I could get them in for free ahead of the queue. Apparently one of them was some big shot soccer player, but I don't like sports and didn't care, so I told a lot of them to queue like everybody else. The number of times security radioed me to come tell some Instagram model that no, she can't jump ahead of the 25 people waiting to come in because she has like 50,000 followers is infuriating. Nope, you're gonna have to wait like everyone else. A small amount of fame really does go to people's heads. Unless you have Johnny Depp's or Beyonce's level of fame, using "Do you know who I am?" to get special treatment should never be the play. Story 3. This is a bit silly, but it gave me a great feeling of satisfaction. Due to the bad economy and poor money management, my parents have moved into the spare room of the house my husband and I bought a year ago. Things are mostly smooth, though. I'm not the closest to them for several reasons I won't go into here. The other evening, I was out gardening, because it's hot during the day and we have the luck of having a street light next to our front yard, keeping it pretty well illuminated even after sundown. I mostly garden at night. Anyway, I thought I had gotten the hose twisted, as it kept getting stuck. This went on for a bit when I realized that it wasn't stuck but being pulled. I looked into the dim area just past the illumination of the streetlight and spied my father crouched over and tugging the hose. Well, I did the only reasonable thing to do and I sprayed him. He yelled and ran inside with me chasing. Once he got inside, he made a face and went, "You can't get me now, I'm inside," in that father-to-daughter don't you make a mess tone of voice. I readied my hose, looked him in the eye and said, "It's my house," and I just let loose with the hose. He was soaked. It was worth cleaning up the mess for that moment of true fear in his eyes. I can just imagine his reaction once you said that. It's like one of those action movie one-liners before the kill. That's exactly what it felt like. That's payback for all the dad pranks from your childhood that had to go without retaliation. Story 4. The guy that I'd gone on a few dates with introduced me to his parents, and things went well, or so I thought. He drives me home, we end up talking and drinking a few beers. I didn't want him on the road with any alcohol in his system, and I enjoyed his company, so we ended up hanging out until 3 a.m. His mom starts blowing up his phone, demanding that he comes home, so he drives himself home to find that he's been locked out of his house. His mom said that he can sleep outside. He shouldn't be spending time with someone like me. Still don't know what she meant by that, and that I'm just just another notch in his belt. He tells her not to talk about me that way, to which she says, "When you're under my roof, I'll say whatever I want about whoever I want." So he picks up his phone, calls me, and asks if he can stay at my place for a little while. It's been 7 years. We're engaged, have a dog, a cat, and a happy life. Did she ever apologize for that? She has not. I've brought it up before during one of those times she was trying to convince me to have him move back in with her or wondering why we aren't closer. All I would get is a change in subject, or sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're angry. Story 5. I was doing IT services for a client of mine. They paid for me to come to their office and address a problem. 8 hours minimum time. The issue was resolved in about 45 minutes. They'd set up something incorrectly, and it was pretty obvious once I'd got in the system. I was packing up to leave, and the client stopped me. "What are you doing?" "The system is fixed, so I'm headed out back to my office." "No, I paid for 8 hours. You'll do your 8 hours. If I tell you to wash my car for 8 hours, that's what you'll be doing." "Right, so anyway, I'm leaving. I'll notify the office to send you the invoice, and in all likelihood will no longer be working with you and withdrawing your lease on our equipment. You're paying for the person's years of experience, not the actual time it takes to complete the job. It's really a day rate, which is pretty smart. It's why tradespeople charge a lot for simple fixes. That and overhead is the same for an easy job and a hard one. Story 6. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night, while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting, and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment/discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed. He left half his order on the counter and started fuming off. Anticipating his next move, I went back to my original post that night, as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. He didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie without popcorn. Good on you. I hate those abusive jerks, always finding some young sweet person to abuse. I swear there's people who genuinely get off on harassing teenagers until they cry. I'm a massively nervous and non-confrontational person, but I even had to step in once when a guy in the movie theater line made the poor counter girl cry because she gave him normal Pepsi instead of Pepsi Max. I understand that some people have other stuff going on and snap at the wrong people, but damn, the 16-year-old girl scooping popcorn into a bucket for minimum wage doesn't deserve your ire. Story 7. I told my ex I was getting married. He told me he was going to stop me and put a lien on my house, which I bought with my money 6 years after the divorce. My son would come home from visitations telling me how his dad was going to stop the wedding, and I'd have to pay him all this money la-di-da. I get to court and his attorney goes blah 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 for what felt like forever. My lawyer stands up and simply hands the judge the divorce papers, showing the disbursement of funds and how my ex isn't owed anything. The judge looks at my ex's lawyer and basically asks, "Did you even ask for this document before filing?" and dismisses the case. The best way to counter a bitter ex is with sweet justice. Story 8. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12-plus hour days, 6 days a week, and we were struggling to hire people quickly enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as heck from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking crap. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is messed up and the department manager, my name, was a total moron and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know anything about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him. He'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to talk my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only the CEO could fire him. I said, "And my name, right?" He sheepishly nodded, so I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be a jerk. I had a boss whose #1 hiring philosophy was, we can teach people work skills, but we can't teach them what their parents should have taught them. It's been a guiding principle for me when hiring ever since. Hell yeah, I have no problem hiring green techs with a good work ethic. Generally, we get way better long-term hires out of them than guys who show up with a decade of experience and a chip on their shoulder. Story 9. When I was in high school, I worked at a popular warehouse club selling computers on the weekends. I was hired by the store manager via referral of a friend. I loved computers and they thought I'd make a good salesman, so my job was to stay in the computer department and sell computers, nothing else. Well, one of the shift managers didn't like that and started insisting that I needed to go fold clothes for a while, as in half my shift. I told him that the store manager had instructed me to never leave the technology department, but he insisted. This went on for several weeks. The store manager showed up one weekend when both the power-tripping shift manager and I were working. The store manager walks up with the shift manager close behind. The store manager slaps a stack of green bar paper down onto a shelf and points to some highlighted numbers. He looks at the shift manager and says, "Do you see this? This is our average technology sales numbers for the weeks that you are on shift. See this number over here? This is our average technology sales numbers for weeks you are not. At this point, it would be more cost-effective for me to simply fire you. What do you think of that solution?" The guy stammers and stutters like a toddler caught bullying another kid on the playground. Fortunately, the dude wasn't fired, but the store manager made it clear that when I was on shift, I would not leave the technology department unless I was on break, or there was a fire in the store. That shift manager never said another word to me. The best jobs are when management has your back. Knowing this and the value of what you bring to the table is the best thing that a manager could have ever done. I hope you kept this as a reference for future jobs. Story 10. I wasn't good at returning library books when I was a kid. I got lectured by my school librarian about it a lot. Fast forward 20 years and I'm a supervisor at the local public library and my former, now retired school librarian goes there. One day I see her sneaking around the front desk instead of coming back to say hi to me, and I immediately figure something's up. I go up and say hi and she acts exasperated and tells me she was going to try to avoid me because she had overdue books. So I put on my reading glasses, pulled them down over my nose, and delivered the same lecture she'd given me countless times about being responsible and turning in books on time. Your training is now complete. When she left you, you were but a learner. Now you are the master. Story 11. I started working for a welding company as an engineering manager. We were selling an extremely complex weldment, the pressure tank that goes under a toilet, for $4.9K. Our costs were $9.3K. The owner took the bid to get in with this big company. The owner legit said, "We'll make it up in volume." We weren't. Anyway, the buyer for the larger company was a huge B word and would regularly yell on the phone calls. We sent them a letter that we would honor the last 5 tanks on the current PO at the same price. I didn't even want to do that, but after they were going up to 10K per. She drove down with her boss the next day and demanded an explanation and threatened to pull the business. I replied that we were losing 5K per tank and couldn't do it anymore. She demanded evidence, which I already had pulled up, and simply turned on the projector. I said, "As you can see, we cannot continue to make this part at such a huge loss, and I don't think anyone can make it for the original price. So if you have to pull the business, we understand." Her boss tripped over himself cutting her off and said they weren't pulling out, and actually thanked us for honoring the current PO. I didn't have many run-ins with her after that. Know your costs and never be afraid to fire a customer. I have many times. Most all come back. Let them save face, and very often they become actual good customers. Also, kudos to the buyer's boss for realizing how close he came to having his employee Karen him out of a pretty sweet deal. Story 12. I was bartending one night and these 3 guys were absolutely hammered, so I cut them off. One of the guys proceeded to try and argue with me, saying he has all this money and he tells me when he's done drinking and he's not even drunk. At this point, I'm done trying to be polite and point blank tell him I'm done arguing with him, will not be serving him at his buddies, and he can leave. He looks at me and says, "Now excuse me, who are you to tell me how much I can and cannot drink?" I look him dead in the eye and say, "The bartender. Now it's time for you to go." The look on his face was priceless. Never forget the golden rule. Don't piss off your bartender. As a fellow bartender, I loved reading this. It's so satisfying when entitled people you've been catering to all night realize that you do in fact call the shots. Pun intended. Ha, exactly. Nothing gives me more pleasure than when I can tell a customer exactly who calls the shots here, especially when it's condescending jerks who think they can speak to me any way they want. Ultimately, we're looking out for your safety at the end of the day. He who pours the shots calls them on these premises. Story 13. A few years ago, a guy stopped me in the hardware store and asked if I was a painter. I looked down at my painter's whites and said, "Yeah, I do historical restoration work." He asked how much I charge per hour, and when I told him, he immediately told me I was too expensive and dropped my rate by 25%. I had already given him my number, but he kept belittling me and saying I wasn't worth it. I just told him that I already had a full-time job and this would be in my off hours, so it needed to be worth my while. He finally let me leave the store, then called me 3 or 4 times, each time hemming and hawing over if he wanted to actually use me or not. He's got a bunch of properties, it would be a sweet gig, but not at those prices. And I just kept telling him, that's fine, don't use me if you don't want to. Eventually, I recognized his number and stopped picking up. He really thought he had some sort of power over me and I'd jump at the opportunity. Luckily, I didn't have to take the work. I was making good enough money as it was. He would have nitpicked absolutely everything and probably not paid me at the end anyway, but he was so certain he'd have power in the situation that he didn't seem to be able to comprehend me not wanting to barter with him. I work for a family-owned restoration company. I hear all the time, well, generic national company will do it for cheaper. Why should I use you? Because we will do it better. Feel free to use a cheaper option because when you call me after to redo what they messed up, you're now paying even more than just us the first time. We literally have 2 paragraphs in our proposals explaining why we are more expensive, and that seems to help our clients understand and weeds out the cheapskates. It talks about the high degree of paint removal, the attention to detail of our training, and how it's important our employees deserve to make a decent living. That might be an idea for you guys to try. Story 14. I worked in a cell phone store selling both devices and service contracts in the UK. Some kid about 19 came in with a much shorter man, who I later learned was his dad. For a reason I've since forgotten, he wanted to cancel out of a contract he was partway through. Now I could already tell from the way the kid explained it in exasperated terms that he knew he couldn't cancel out of it, but his dad wasn't taking his word for it, and had dragged him in to try and sort it out for him. The contracts clearly state you can't cancel prematurely without paying off the rest of your dues, which I explained, and his father just went full boomer rage mode on me, spitting, frothing, hurling vitriol. This guy clearly thought this was how you get things done. I stared him down, waited for him to finish, and repeated the contractual terms as stated. He hit me back with, "I'll report you for violating the Sale of Goods Act." Sucks to be him because I had memorized it. I made a point of it. In fact, after the first few customers in my early days tried to bring it up to get their own way. Some punk on the internet had made posts about how you could sling the term around and usually scare retailers into doing what you want because they don't know it either. So it happened a lot even when there was absolutely no call for it. I just looked at him and said, "Sure, go ahead. You can even use our phone," and pointed at the store phone right next to him. I knew he didn't have a leg to stand on, and any trade commissioner listening to his claim would laugh him off the line. He clearly had absolutely no idea how to proceed. After a moment of blank staring, he just turned and stormed out with his son rolling his eyes so far back into his head he could probably see his own brain in embarrassment at his dad's tantrum. 19 years old and his dad wants him to cancel a contract? The dad struck me as the type who thinks he always knows the answer, and given his reaction to my shutdown of his plan, couldn't process it not working. So when the kiddo told his dad he couldn't pay for it, then dad thought he had a genius master plan to get the kid out of it altogether. Trying to bail out your adult kids like this teaches them nothing, though in this situation the son fortunately did learn how to not get out of a contract. Story 15. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I checked their phone number and find multiple accounts, each 1 to 2 orders, and all of them complaining about hair in their food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for their last order, since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me and threatens to never use the service again. The typical stuff they always say. Eventually, the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, and then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and that person denies the refund. The next day, she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. I've managed in the service industry for years, and the number of people who make that threat, having never spent a penny, is baffling, especially this year. I swear it's once a week right now that after I tell somebody to leave and not return, they've threatened to not return. I've had to have police remove people, and they'll scream about how they'll never return on their way out. Are the police dragging you out not enough of a sign that that's exactly what I want? What about the criminal trespassing notice you got? Some people just cannot fathom that they're not wanted everywhere by everyone. Some dudes would walk in for the first time and loudly declare, "I'm finally here," like they just got back from liberating France. And it was just a big old red flag that declared, "I will demand special treatment the entire time I'm here." Story 16. I worked at a grocery store for 5 years, putting up with crazy customers and their awful attitudes. At the end of my tenure, our store was set to be closed, and for the last month, the store was sold to a liquidation company, meaning we were no longer under our parent company's umbrella and were no longer concerned with retaining customer loyalty. I got to tell customers no, and respond with every bit of sarcasm and disdain to every Karen I encountered for 1 month until the store officially closed. Geez, did you just skip to work every day for that last month? I would love to just hang out in the store and witness the deserved sass. Customer service is rough. That last month was the most relaxed month in retail I've ever had. I'd only finished college and was finally comprehending a world where I could relax after hours. We were allowed to go in casual clothes as long as we wore our work smock, and just about all of our standards went out the window. When I was covering the customer service desk, I was even making sandwiches for lunch in full view of the customers while I was tending to them. My personal favorite was when someone in their 50s complained about how we were no longer honoring the flyer for something on sale. Detergent, I think. Anyway, he's going on this tirade about how he'll go to another store and he wanted to talk to a manager. I just told him we weren't with the company anymore, and it didn't matter if he talked to a manager because he still wasn't getting anything extra from us. The safety was off. Story 17. Sometime in the late 80s, I worked at a Walmart warehouse. There was a strict rule. If you didn't have your security badge, you could not get in the front door. One day, just behind me, an older fellow gets stopped by loss prevention for no badge. One of my friends pokes me and points out that the LP guy just refused to let Sam Walton in the door. We all stopped to watch what we assumed was going to be a crap show. To his credit, Mr. Walton stops and goes back to his vehicle to get his badge, and he thanked the LP guy for following the rules. Geez, I did a stint at Walmart, and it was one of the older stores, as we're not too far from Arkansas, where they started. Several of my coworkers met the guy, and apparently the way the stores were run before he passed away and after he passed are two different animals. From what I have read, Sam Walton's business model was the following: sell domestic goods at foreign-made prices, do so profitably by reducing turnover and economy of scale, treat your workers extremely well both to keep them and to provide exemplary customer service. This does sound like a very different beast. This is a case of, I have the power to end your career, but I love your energy, kiddo. Story 18. I was working as a consultant for a company, and there was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. The company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they brought in the guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. Story 19. I worked at a movie theater and some customers were adamant that a staff member had stolen their wallet after they dropped it. It turned out that these people just couldn't see and found the wallet once they had actually looked for it. They got irate with literally everyone, from the mall security to the managers to the staff. Mall security finally said, "Get the F out." And the customers went, "You can't say that. This isn't your theater. We're customers." Mall security guy promptly said, "This is my mall, and I can do whatever I want." I love that security guard, and I hope he gets nothing but the best in life as he deserves. Absolute king energy. Story 20. My job right before my current one. I was a property manager and the owner was an absolute jerk. He was heartless and rude and racist, and I loathed him. I hated every day going into that job, but I needed the money. I was applying daily to my dream job in hopes that eventually I'd be accepted. In the meantime, every time I complained or mentioned something to my supervisor, I was told to shut up and just get on with it. He was paying me too much to have opinions. 3 years later, we were in a small office and the receptionist and assistant prop managers quit. I finally got accepted into my dream company and happily put in my 2 weeks notice. In desperation, he offered me more money, a higher position, and better benefits, which were laughable. When I said no, he asked why. I have never felt more gleeful than the moment when I said, "I don't know, I'm not paid enough to have opinions here." That was a year ago, and even now the look on his stupid old face gives me joy to this day. Nice! How did you like your dream job now compared to that place? It's great. My boss is so awesome and willing to teach me the ropes of an industry I've always wanted to work in. But I also went from 5 days paid time off to 30. God bless European companies in the US. You waited 3 years for the perfect moment to drop that line. That is poetic justice at its finest. Story 21. I'm a high school teacher who teaches a lot of senior grades, and so has to deal with graduation grades, references for university, and all that jazz. I had a parent of a graduating kid in my classroom in June, after final marks were given to students, but not formally reported, who was a dental surgeon in town, ran a large operation, and donated a lot to local sports. He was a big man in a small town. I had given his kid a mark in the high B range, and so he marched into my office and started off with, "There must be some mistake," which moved swiftly into the "you're going to change it because I'm telling you to "how much will it cost to get him the A?" When I refused the bribe, he went to "you're fired." Not "I'm going to get you fired," but "you're fired. Clean out your desk." I just asked him to leave. It ended badly. He threatened violence. I reported him to the school admin and he's now banned from the property. Mr. I pay your salary so you work for me, you lousy piece of crap, was threatened with the cops by Mr. Random Act PG. Story 22. Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp "do not copy" on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency and I needed a copy. The locals were terrified to ask, so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. The woman started having a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine, I'll issue a subpoena. What's your name and job title?" She answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. I guess she wasn't used to that. And then what happened? I got what I needed to do my job, and I did it. When I was done, I was kind of sad the file wouldn't get escalated higher, because then we would have been required to copy it at least 4 times. People in my office would have been amused by the photocopied "do not copy" stamp. Story 23. Had an old boss who was a complete and total a-hole. He was actually my boss's boss and wasn't supposed to interact with us unless it was through our boss, but he just loved trying to make everyone under him squirm. The company had forced him to go to training twice because of how he spoke to people. One day I got a call at home from him, and he just starts unloading, cursing, name-calling, insulting over some technical issue he just found out about. After a couple of minutes, I just looked at my phone and hung up on him. The next day I get called into a meeting with his boss, who basically wants to know who the heck I think I am hanging up on this guy. I calmly explained that no one gets to yell at me on my time in my home on my phone. You have to wait for me to be on the clock to pay me for that privilege, and I'll gladly take that money. If I'm busy being yelled at, I'm not busy with anything else. It seemed to work. Brother, you are as cool as ice. I'm taking notes and slow clapping it out. I wasn't that cool back then. This was my first big job running a cooling plant and I was a nervous wreck, chain smoking through every shift and hating whenever this guy would rattle me. I think I was as surprised as he was when I hung up on him and stood my ground. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story that you would like to share, please leave it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again and see you next time.